The day federal agents walked into my parents' backyard celebration, my mother was laughing with a glass of lemonade in her hand, telling everyone that my Army promotion was cute, but not exactly success. My father stood beside the grill with his proud businessman smile, nodding like he had been waiting years for the whole neighborhood to agree with him. And I stood there in my dress uniform under the bright afternoon sun, holding the certificate they had refused to frame, wondering how many times a son could be humiliated by the same two people before his heart finally stopped asking them to be proud. Before I tell you what happened next, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Single Dad Empire if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the kind of quiet strength that keeps people standing, even when their own family refuses to see their worth. My name is Callan Brooks, and for most of my life, my parents treated my Army career like a temporary embarrassment. They had built their entire identity around appearances. My father, Vernon Brooks, owned a chain of appliance stores across 3 counties and loved reminding people that he had made himself from nothing, even though he measured everyone else by money, cars, and the size of their house. My mother, Maribel, was softer in public but sharper in private. She never shouted. She smiled while cutting you down, which somehow hurt more. When I enlisted at 20, she cried, not because she was afraid for me, but because she said I was throwing away my chance to become someone respectable. I wasn't a troublemaker. I wasn't lazy. I had decent grades, a quiet nature, and a stubborn sense of duty I couldn't explain. But I never wanted my father's stores, his sales meetings, or his obsession with looking successful. I wanted discipline, purpose, and a place where my effort mattered more than my last name. The Army gave me that. It gave me early mornings, sore muscles, hard lessons, and brothers who judged me by whether I showed up when things got difficult. For the first time in my life, I felt useful. But every visit home reminded me that usefulness was not enough for Vernon and Maribel Brooks. When I came home after basic training, my father looked at my uniform and said it looked like a costume. When I earned my first leadership position, my mother asked if it came with real money. When I was deployed overseas, they sent one short email telling me my younger cousin had bought a new house and that maybe I should think about my future. I read that message in a dusty tent while explosions trembled, somewhere beyond the horizon, and I remember closing my eyes because I did not want the men beside me to see me break. Years passed. I rose slowly, not because anyone handed me anything, but because I refused to quit. I trained harder than I thought possible. I learned how to lead frightened young soldiers through chaos, how to stay calm when radios screamed and roads disappeared under smoke, how to write letters to families when the worst happened, and how to carry grief without letting it poison the mission. I missed birthdays, holidays, weddings, and funerals. I watched friends become names carved into stone. I held the hands of men who were braver than I would ever be and promised them they would not be forgotten. Still, to my parents, I was the son who had chosen a government job in boots. My younger sister, Renata, became a real estate developer and was treated like royalty. My older brother, Alistair, joined my father's company and became the golden heir. Every family dinner became a comparison I never asked for. They discussed profits, properties, investments, and then glanced at me like I was a charity case who had wandered in wearing medals nobody understood. The worst moment came the summer I was promoted to lieutenant colonel. It was a quiet, beautiful day at the base, the kind of day where the sky looked polished and endless. My commanding officer spoke about service, sacrifice, and leadership. A few soldiers I had mentored stood in the back with proud smiles. One of them, a young sergeant named Imani Valle, had tears in her eyes because I had once helped her stay in after a family crisis nearly ended her career. That ceremony meant something to me. It represented 21 years of grit, pain, discipline, and loyalty. I mailed my parents a copy of the promotion announcement and invited them to the celebration. They did not come. My mother texted that they had a charity luncheon. My father wrote only, "Congratulations. Hope it comes with a better salary." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I put the phone down, shook hands with my soldiers, and smiled because leaders do not always get to bleed in public. A month later, my parents invited me to a daytime family barbecue at their house. They said it was for Renata's new development deal, but my mother added that I should wear my uniform because some people might enjoy seeing it. I should have known what that meant. Their backyard was full of neighbors, business partners, relatives, and old family friends. White tables sat beneath bright umbrellas. Waiters moved between guests with trays of iced tea and small sandwiches. The whole scene looked like a magazine spread about successful families, except I felt like the mistake they had forgotten to crop out. At first, I tried to be polite. I greeted people, answered questions, and stood near the edge of the patio where the sunlight warmed the grass. A few older men thanked me for my service. A little boy asked about my medals, and I explained them gently. For a moment, I almost felt like maybe this day could be peaceful. Then my father raised his glass and began giving a speech about success. He praised Renata's ambition. He praised Alistair's loyalty. He praised my mother for building their family's image. Then he looked at me with that half smile I knew too well and said that every family needed someone humble, enough to remind them that not all paths led to greatness. The laughter was small at first, uncertain, but my mother filled the silence by touching my arm and saying my promotion was still something in its own way. Someone asked what rank I had achieved, and when I answered, my father chuckled and said, "Well, at least the army gives titles to keep morale up." The words landed like stones. I felt heat rise in my face, but I did not argue. I had been trained to stand still under pressure. I had survived worse than public humiliation. But the pain was different because this battlefield was my childhood home, and the people firing were the ones who should have protected me. Then the black SUVs arrived. At first, nobody noticed them, because the music was playing and everyone was pretending the atmosphere had not turned cruel. But I saw them through the side gate. 3 government vehicles pulling up in a clean line along the curb. Men and women in dark suits stepped out, their faces serious, their movements sharp and practiced. My father lowered his glass. My mother's smile faded. Conversations died one by one as the agents entered the backyard. The lead agent was a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and a calm authority that made the whole yard feel smaller. Beside her walked a man carrying a sealed folder with an official emblem. My father stepped forward quickly, wearing his businessman charm like armor, and asked if there was a problem. The woman did not even look at him for more than a second. Her eyes found me. She asked if I was Lieutenant Colonel Callan Brooks. My mother's hand flew to her necklace. My father's face tightened. Someone whispered behind me. I stepped forward and said yes. The agent introduced herself as Special Agent Mireya Holt, attached to a federal task force investigating procurement fraud, classified material leaks, and a chain of defense contractors who had been selling compromised equipment to units overseas. My parents looked confused. So did most of the guests. But I understood enough to feel my stomach turn cold. Years earlier, during a deployment, my unit had nearly been destroyed because communications gear failed during an operation. We had blamed heat, dust, bad maintenance, all the usual enemies. But I had filed reports afterward. Detailed reports. Reports that named serial numbers, supplier inconsistencies, missing inspection records, and a pattern nobody wanted to hear about at the time. I had been told to move on. I never did. Agent Holt opened the folder and explained that my reports had become the foundation for a federal investigation that uncovered a network responsible for putting thousands of service members at risk. She said my persistence had saved lives, protected national security, and led to arrests that morning across multiple states. Then she said they had come personally, because the department wanted to formally notify me before the public announcement and to escort me to Washington the following week for a commendation. The backyard was silent, completely silent. My father's face had drained of color. My mother looked at the uniform she had mocked as if seeing it for the first time. Renata lowered her eyes. Alistair stared at the grass. The neighbors who had laughed moments earlier now stood frozen beneath the bright afternoon sun. The same metals they had treated like decoration suddenly seemed heavier than all my father's money. But Agent Holt was not finished. She turned slightly toward my father and said that one of the companies under investigation had attempted to bury the early reports through private influence, including pressure from business contacts with ties to civilian suppliers. My father blinked. The charming smile vanished from his face. I saw fear flicker in his eyes before he could hide it. Agent Holt did not accuse him in front of everyone, but she made it clear that federal agents would be speaking to several local business owners in the coming days. That was when I understood the final cruelty of it. My father had not just dismissed my career because he thought it was small. Somewhere along the way, he may have known that the world I served in was connected to profits, contracts, and men who cared more about money than soldiers coming home alive. Maybe he had not known everything. Maybe he had only heard whispers. But he had mocked the very work that exposed the kind of greed he respected. My mother stepped toward me, tears gathering in her eyes, and whispered that she had no idea. I wanted to believe her. A younger version of me would have begged for that moment, would have fallen into her arms because at last she saw me. But the man standing there had buried friends, led soldiers, and learned that love without respect is just another kind of hunger. I looked at her gently and said that not knowing had never stopped her from judging. The words broke something open in her. She covered her mouth and cried, not loudly, not dramatically, but like someone finally hearing the echo of every cruel thing she had said. My father tried to speak, but no sound came. For once, Vernon Brooks had no speech prepared, no joke, no price tag to place on another person's worth. Agent Holt asked if I was ready to leave. I looked around the backyard, the white umbrellas, the expensive food, the stunned relatives, the father who had spent years measuring manhood in money, and the mother who had made shame sound polite. Then I looked down at my uniform. It was not a costume. It was not a backup plan. It was the story of every mile I had marched, every soldier I had protected, every lonely night I had chosen duty over comfort. Near the patio, the little boy who had asked about my medals earlier stepped forward and saluted, me with clumsy seriousness. That small gesture almost undid me. I returned the salute, and for the first time that day, I smiled for real. As I walked toward the gate with the federal agents, my mother called my name. I stopped but did not turn right away. She said she was sorry. Not for one comment. Not for the party. For years. For all of it. Her voice shook so badly that every guest heard her. My father stood beside her, smaller than I had ever seen him, and finally said that he had been wrong. I turned then. The afternoon sun was behind them, and for a strange second they looked old, fragile and human instead of powerful. I told them I had waited my whole life to hear those words, but I had also learned how to live without them. I said forgiveness might come one day, but it would not be performed for an audience. It would require truth, time, and the humility to understand that service is not pathetic just because it cannot be counted in cash. Weeks later, I stood in Washington under a clean blue sky as my name was read in front of officers, officials, and families who understood the cost of silence. I accepted the commendation not as proof that I had become worthy, but as proof that I had always been worthy, even when the people closest to me refused to see it. My parents watched from the back row. They had asked to come, and I had allowed it. My mother cried quietly through the ceremony. My father did not speak much, but when I stepped down, he stood straighter than I had ever seen him and saluted me with trembling fingers. It was not perfect. Families rarely heal in one clean moment. Pride leaves bruises, and apologies do not erase years overnight. But after the ceremony, my father asked if I would tell him about the soldiers whose lives were changed by the investigation. My mother asked if she could frame the promotion certificate. For the first time, they did not ask about salary, benefits, or what came next. They asked about people. They asked about service. They asked about the son they had never taken the time to know. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to remember their worth, and subscribe to Single Dad Empire for more emotional stories about courage, kindness, and second chances. And before the ending, comment. Respect the uniform if you believe no honest service should ever be mocked. In the end, the federal agents did not give me my dignity back. My parents did not give it back either. The truth was they had never owned it. I had carried it quietly all along, through every insult, every lonely deployment, every dismissed promotion, and every day I chose to keep serving anyway. Sometimes the people who mock your path are simply standing too far away to see the battles you survived. But when the truth finally arrives, it does not always shout. Sometimes it walks through a backyard in broad daylight, wearing a badge, carrying a folder, and proving that the life they called pathetic was the very life that protected them all.